Big takeaways and things we learned from Michigan's now concluded spring football practice. We'll get into those things next right here on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it, hit, caught!
Hey, they said you can't be Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, and a touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle, caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet, touchdown Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming, sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, and welcome to our new episode of Michigan Podcast. I'm Steve Deace, and of course, the big news, the Wolverines concluding, I think before any other program, at least power conference program in America, their spring football with an actual spring game, a draft. There was tackling, there was hitting, there was competition, and even though it was a limited glimpse based on what we saw and then what we've heard and read about various practice reports throughout the course of the last few weeks, I think there's 5 things that we can kind of project or take away from this spring game for Michigan in spring practice. 5 things that we've learned. Let's start with this very first one, number 5. I think the spring hype about Mike Sanderstill, Olu Oluwatimi, I think I got that right, and Darius Clemens, that hype is very real. Let's take these one by one. So Mike Sanderstill, the position switch he's made. We've not seen him a lot at wide receiver for Michigan because, frankly, in the Harbaugh era, we just don't see wide receivers a lot. But the couple times we have seen Mike Sanderstill, the dude has made some insane catches and plays. I think of the Nebraska and Maryland games last year. He switched over to like a nickel corner position this year in the spring to play the slot. We had heard all kinds of hype about him, and you never know. I kind of have the Grady Brooks rule. Those of you that are old school Michigan fans, you'll remember perennial spring football MVP Grady Brooks, who then when the games counted, you just never heard from him ever again. So it's kind of hard to ascertain what's real and what's not. Very first pass play of the spring game, Michigan starting quarterback CADE McNamara tries to challenge Sanderstill down the field against Andrell Anthony. He is locked in man-to-man coverage, makes the play, and from that point on, it looked like he absolutely belonged. I think that hype is very real, and he's going to be a positive impact on Michigan's defense later this year. In fact, there's talk about him being a 3-tool player, special teams, and still playing some snaps on offense. For Ola Oluwatimi, he was the All-American Remington Award finalist at center, the grad transfer from Virginia. And this is already going to be a very good offensive line. Michigan returns this year, and I think with his addition, it has the potential to be better than last year's line that won the Joe Moore Award. He was a difference maker out there in the spring game. You could even see that he was clearing much brush, a lot of room. He is going to be a dominant factor for Michigan at the center position. And with him and Trevor Keegan and Zach Zinner, that's as good of an interior for an offensive line as is returning this year in college football. And then you go to Darius Clemens, the prized freshman, one of the late additions to this recruiting class, early enrollee, recruited by a lot of big-time programs, 6'3", jumps out of the gym, fast, and even on a team loaded at wide receiver. I think he was targeted in this game 10 times, which indicates just how much confidence he has built amongst the quarterbacks on the roster in just 15 spring practices. So that's a young man, even though this is as loaded of a wide receiver room as Michigan has had in recent memory. We're going to see and hear a lot from him this fall. You are not going to keep him off the field. Number 4. About things we learned this spring. I think the players on the defensive line, which is considered going into this offseason the biggest question mark for Michigan, they certainly pass the eye test. Now, we are not going to see, what we saw last year with David Ojabo and especially Aiden Hutchinson. That's arguably the greatest pass rushing duo in the illustrious history of Michigan football. And you're just not going to be able to, you can't replace that. We don't recruit at an Alabama, Georgia level just to roll in the next line of Trayvon Walkers, and players of that magnitude. So it's not as if the guys that have been behind in waiting in the wings are stiffs. Braden McGregor was offered by Alabama, for example. These guys are big-time recruits too, but we just don't churn those level of athletes off the edge. Only a couple of programs do, and it's why they're the ones winning national championships. But the overall depth that was shown on the defensive front, I think it looked improved over last year. You clearly notice guys like George Rooks and Rayshon Benny. They certainly looked like they belonged out there. They were stout, held up at the point of attack against, even with teams divided up. I mean, that's still one of the best offensive lines that those guys are going to face in a game situation this season when you look at how weak Michigan's overall schedule is. So I thought the discipline was there. There were a couple of times they got sucked into gaps, and that allowed for big cutback runs. But overall, they looked like they belonged, and I'm not nearly as concerned about that as I was heading into the offseason, and I don't think you should be either. Now, we're going to have to schematically manufacture a pass rush more this year. We're not going to get away with, hey, just turn Ojabo and Aiden loose and keep everybody in front of you there in the back seven. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Overall, the bodies there look like they belong, and they definitely look like they're worthy of a Michigan uniform. Number 3. I think that J.J. McCarthy is still going to have a chance to unseat CADE McNamara, despite not throwing at all in the spring to rest that ailing shoulder. Now, I did not think that heading into the spring. I thought, and I might have even said so here on Michigan Podcast, that McCarthy not being able to have one throwing rep the entire spring, it makes it almost impossible for him to unseat a sitting quarterback who just won a Big Ten championship. And then I watched the spring game. And keep in mind, this is a showcase. All over the country, quarterbacks are going to throw up crazy, sick, insane numbers in spring games. Now, we did allow the rushing of the passer, but not of CADE McNamara. He wore a white jersey. You could rush him, but you couldn't tackle him. You couldn't take him down. So he doesn't have to worry about being hit. There's an absolutely loaded wide receiver room. He completed, though, only 2 passes in 4 drives, and they were both checkdowns on 3rd and long. That just ain't going to cut it, man. That ain't going to cut it. And there was no play or throw that he made that made me think, oh, yeah, CADE found an extra gear from last year. Because J.J. McCarthy has an extra gear. You know that he does. So, based on what I saw, to me, the talent differential between the two eventually just ends up taking over. I still think at the beginning of the season, you'll see CADE start, but I could see a Kelly Bryant, Trevor Lawrence situation here by about week 3, week 4, week 5. There was no point in that game that I thought to myself, there's something new or different from CADE McNamara. It's set up for him to be successful. He's not going to get hit, and they're loaded at receiver all over the field on both teams. So I think J.J. McCarthy's absolutely still in this race, despite not throwing one competitive pass once the entire spring. Number 2. This is the most comprehensive depth on a Michigan football roster in recent memory. This looks like the Lloyd Carr era out there. Well, basically what we just got accustomed to around here for 30 years. The overall depth of competition, too. Splitting the teams in half and letting them go at it in a real football game. That's how we used to do spring football games around here back in the day when we were a championship program. And funny, now that we are again, we can still do that. I thought that was the big takeaway overall was, one of the two big takeaways, just how good the depth is and how much young players are going to add to that depth right away. So many early enrollees and so many guys that were in that very well reviewed 2020 class or 2021 class that look like they're really ready to make big steps as sophomores. I just mentioned a couple of them, George Rooks and Rayshon Benny, but they are hardly alone. And then the biggest thing that I thought we learned, and this gets to, I think, what is the other big takeaway, that long missing legacy of competition and swagger passed on from one team to the next, what we used to call around here, tradition. That's what Jim Harbaugh was hired 7 years ago to bring back to the program. I think it's finally back. It's finally returned. If you saw the way those guys playing for one side's going to eat boiled hot dogs and the other one's getting steaks from the old chop house, if you saw the way they celebrated and ran smack at each other when the blue team ended up winning that, I mean, they look like they just won the Big Ten championship out there. That's what you're looking for, is that kind of swagger, that kind of competitiveness, and then that kind of depth that when you pit half of your team against the other, it's actually a competitive football game. So I think those are good meta signs for where we are as a football program and probably speak to why Jim Harbaugh said a couple of weeks ago that, quote, the program is scary good right now, unquote. Now, on a micro level, lineup decisions you make, plays that you call, game plans you conjure up determine whether you're a 9-3 or a 11-1, 12-0 team, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it in the fall. But the meta stuff is what you're dealing with in the spring, and right now, I think the optimism should spring us forward heading into now the rest of the offseason, and about a month from now or a couple months from now when the preview magazines get to rolling, and we'll be thinking about fall practice here before you know it. Optimism should abound right now within the Michigan fandom. We'll get another perspective on that when we return. March is officially here. The madness is underway, which means this is one of the ideal times to become one of our supporters on our Patreon page at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You get my daily college basketball handicapping picks, which have done very well this season. And we're going to pick every NCAA tournament game against the spread. We've done that the last 2 years and had a phenomenal record both of those seasons. So this is the perfect time right now to sign up to support us. Michigan Podcast, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And thanks to all of you who support us year round at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Well, you can't get a much different perspective than a Buckeye. So let's get to the 10-minute war with our good friend Mark Rogers. The voice of college football has a phenomenal channel right here on YouTube, and that's what it's called. And this is not that you don't want to watch it year-round, but especially here in the off-season, guys. This is when you get ahead of future markets and betting markets. You get a lot of information from people that he has on all over the country that cover the sport year-round. It'll make you some money, I promise you. And it's good to see you again, my friend. How are you?
Good to see you, Steve. It's been a while, and I'll let everybody know that we're in the midst of coaches' rankings. We're going through all the Power 5 conferences and running through our coaches' rankings, and we typically save the Big Ten and the SEC for the final couple days, so we'll see where your guy stacks up in the Big Ten.
Good stuff. Well, let's get to, I know you've had a chance to look at some of my takeaways from spring football, which I was just discussing. And to me, the two meta ones is the overall level of depth is way above what I've seen in this program in many a moon. In fact, I think you got to go back probably towards the 03, 04, 06, that last great run of attempted greatness that Lloyd Carr had. I think that's probably the last time we had this kind of comprehensive depth on the roster. And then I just see what we call tradition, which is really swagger, competitiveness, culture. I really saw that come out in this team in ways we haven't seen at Michigan a lot over the last 10 10, 15 years and haven't seen in the Harbaugh era since right after he first took over and tried to reinstill it. Those are some of my big takeaways, and we can get into those or more of a micro look at particular positions if you want, but tell me what you're thinking.
Well, Steve, I caught the last few lines of your take, and you reiterated what Jim Harbaugh stated a few weeks ago when he said, we're scary good. Maybe my role on this show as we progress is becoming to bring this more into balance. So for those many months, as you recall, especially going back to that awful 2020 season, I tended to be lifting your spirits and lifting you, or attempting to, I should say, your optimism and your perspective on the program. Maybe I'm going to start to suppress it down the other way a little bit now, bring a little balance to this. I do think, to your point, that specifically in the speed category, I see more waves of players with top-end speed, with really good speed at the perimeter positions on both sides of the football than what we've seen in the past. So to extend on your depth narrative there from the speed perspective. I'll go from the top here. CADE McNamara obviously quartered for both teams right out of the gate. He's the only guy that didn't get touched, and I will credit Jim Harbaugh and the approach of the spring game. Not that there's not reason to put the quarterbacks out of harm's way, but it was just, it brings validity to it in terms of the pass rush and the quarterback's escapability when they're live, when they're in play. So that was good to see there. Just it gives you another dimension of what does the pass rush really look like. We're not bringing quarterbacks down in the fall by a fingernail. So that doesn't happen. So what is that really going to look like there? And especially with missing the two stud defensive ends from last season's team. But CADE McNamara, he's established himself to the point where it shouldn't be alarming what we saw on Saturday, but it also gives cause to pause and say, is he ever going to progress even more? Is he going to become a better player, or is he the 21 version of CADE McNamara from here on out, and this is what he is, which is fine, but he just misses throws. I don't know. I think he's shown us both in the spring game, but that being a confirmation of what we saw last season, is that most of the time he's not going to be threading a needle from distance. So that's one takeaway. I brought up the speed on the outside. A lot of successful transitions from offense to defense or defense to offense for a number of players. And of course, Hassan Haskins was the poster child for that, and with rave reviews, and remarkable what he accomplished as a running back of making that transition from running back to linebacker, then to running back. But those seem to be successful transitions as maybe role players. But the one guy that could be a standout at his new position is, of course, Mike Sanderstill, who on a few deep passes and where he was challenged, certainly was in position to make plays and break up passes and looked up to the challenge. Like, he's made that a smooth transition. And so that stands out to me. I heard some rumblings about A.J. Henning possibly being like a Deebo Samuel type player. I don't necessarily see that in his body build. He doesn't look like the guy that could necessarily take that kind of beating and punishment on a regular basis. Just a few things that come to mind. But I'm going to offer this one up to you, Steve, before I throw it back to you. 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3. I'm not discounting Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards between the tackles, but they're more space guys. Hassan Haskins could be missed in those kind of situations against quality fronts.
So 2 points, I think, that I definitely want to address. Let's start with CADE, and then we'll go to the missing of Hassan Haskins and what it is that he brought to the table, because this actually ties anything to the CADE conversation. Lou Holtz used to say that he always coached as if he had a different team every week, because he had, these are college kids, right? Okay, You don't know finals, girls, parents, injuries, all the things that can go on that can be distractions. You can have a different team on a week-to-week basis. That's why guys like you and me who do handicapping on the side, we're looking for let-down spots and what are right desperate situations, right? We're analyzing those kinds of trend lines. The same is true on a year-to-year basis. On a year-to-year basis, you're a different team year-to-year. Even if you're bringing a lot of people back, and we are. I think I told you before, 33 of the 47 players that were on the 2-deep in the Orange Bowl, we are bringing back, okay? But you're a different team every year. Last year was really about stabilizing the program. And it just and the triage just went better in real time than anybody thought, to the point that the patient got up and actually didn't even need a gurney to get to the ambulance, just walked into the ambulance on his own and said, "What's up?" You know, I mean, so no one could have guessed that, though. No one could have guessed. I did say before the season that I thought we'd have some kind of like meltdown or 85 breakthrough. I didn't think it'd be anything in between. But you were a little more optimistic than me going in for sure, because I thought a meltdown was more likely. But the triage went well, and I think that CADE McNamara performed his function as a paramedic very well. But a paramedic is not a doctor. And I think maybe what you're learning is at best he might be a nurse practitioner, but he is still not a doctor. And this is a game, he faced a pass rush, but he wasn't going to get hit. There's speed and receivers all over the place. And you still can't show me, there was nothing in, and how many plays did he play? A lot. There was nothing there. I thought, well, that's different. That's new. And I really think the possibility is he's just tapped out from a talent standpoint. And hey, if your tap out is, you know, I won a Big Ten championship, there's worse tap outs than that, right? The problem is this year's team is different. And last year we had an historically great pass rush. We are not going to have that again. I don't think the defense is going to fall off the map at all, but it'll just look different. And it's going to require taking more risk than we had to take last year. Last year, we could do a lot of stuff with leaving people in front of us. Everybody keeps talking about, oh, you won the game against Ohio State because the snow. Stroud threw for 400 flipping yards, okay? Our game plan last year was we're just staying back. We're not giving up big plays. We're not going over the top. We'll have those two guys that coming off the edge. Eventually, they'll play game wrecker eventually. And we wanted to win wars of attrition last year because offensively that's how we were playing. We had one guy run for 20 touchdowns, another guy run for nearly 1,000 yards. Okay, so we were fine. That was our game flow. If you beat us in a war of attrition, we were okay with that because that's what we wanted the game to be. Okay, this year defensively we're going to have to take more risks to rush the passer, to pressure the passer, and that is invariably going to mean there will be more big plays given up on the back end, which gets back into complementary football. Invariably, that means we're going to have to score more points on the offensive side and more explosively at times to compensate for that. And so this sort of trench warfare that we played last year, we don't have the backs for it. Now, I think we have two better pro prospects for backs. All right, but 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3 aren't running downs for us now, like they were the last 2 years with Haskins. The only running back in the last 5 years of college football that gained more yards after contact than Hassan Haskins was Najee Harris. That's pretty damn good company, okay? So we are going to have to be more of it. We have big play backs. We kind of have more Ohio State style of backs, frankly. I mean, Blake Corum almost looks like a spitting image of J.K. Dobbins from a physicality standpoint. Doesn't have quite that level of ability, but their game styles are very similar. So, and then you got all these receivers. We are going to have to be more of a big play offense. And I'm not confident that he's a big play quarterback. And I went into the spring after JJ's shoulder injury thinking, well, that just does it. There's no way he can, make up the ground without throwing a competitive pass in the spring. I don't think that anymore. In fact, I kind of think you're probably looking at a Kelly Bryant, Trevor Lawrence situation. And it's just a matter of, at what juncture of the season does it become obvious? And you have to be careful here because CADE is incredibly popular with his teammates, as is JJ as well. So you need to do it at a time that it's obvious that we've maxed ourselves out, right? So you almost have to probably do it after it's obvious you need to do it than before because you don't want to wreck the chemistry of the team. But I think you and I are pretty astute college football fans. We've been doing this since our first rodeo. You can kind of see that it's heading towards that trajectory, right? Eventually.
Yeah, and I don't know what the teams individual within the locker rooms with their preferences are between the two quarterbacks or how much of an allegiance they had toward CADE McNamara. But when you got that Big Ten championship ring, that makes it somewhat different of a dynamic than Kelly Bryant, who had accomplished nothing, who had shown that I'm going to be a capable quarterback. I can lead this team because there's so much talent to 11-1 or 10-2, but it's going to be the playoffs that's going to make the difference for that particular Clemson team. And that, of course, proved to be the right decision. But in this matter, yeah, do you wait until when it becomes obvious, is obvious losing a game that you may not be able to afford to lose, or is obvious, struggling to score 30 points against some of the cream puffs in the 4-game non-conference?
Probably the former. Now, JJ has a lot of experience. I don't think they're scared about if the offense is sluggish in Iowa City, the first real game of the season there. I don't think that they care whatsoever about, remember, they came out at halftime in Madison, Wisconsin, and put him on the field, and everybody thought that was a huge mistake, and then he drove him down for a touchdown, okay? I don't think that they care about the situation. So I don't think it's that, well, let's get past the Iowa game. If it's the middle of the second, late, if it's halftime and it's 10-7 Iowa, and we can't move the football, and they've got us in trench warfare, their style, I think they have no issue about making the switch then. I just think it has to be that kind of a situation. Because of the respect that Cade has rightfully earned amongst his teammates. I don't think it's a situation that, unless JJ's, intergalactically ahead, I don't believe they're going to let a guy who didn't throw one time in spring ball start the first game of the year over the guy that's probably going to be a captain and the Big Ten returning quarterback. But chemistry works both ways, because ultimately, more than guys like the guys they like the guys that help them win. They want to do that more than anything else. And so that's what I mean. When it becomes obvious now that this guy is your better chance to win, the 3 games on the 3, this is really a 4-game schedule. Michigan's going to be a double-digit favorite at least in 8 games. It's a 4-game schedule at Iowa, Penn State, and Michigan State at home, and at Ohio State. Okay, and Michigan's got to at least split those games to get to 10-2 in the New Year's Six Bowl and have this season be considered any kind of a success. And so I'm not really worried about it, actually. I'd actually be more worried about it if Cade was dynamite and showed, oh yeah, there is an extra gear there, because then you're talking about, do you lose McCarthy? Now we may not get the Dante Moore kit. You see what I'm saying? The fact that it's getting increasingly obvious that this is just who Cade McNamara is, then I'm not worried about it. Sooner or later, you end up benching. We've seen this with Jim before. You end up benching Alex Smith for Colin Kaepernick sooner or later. And once it becomes pretty obvious that the other guy has taken you as far as he can. And so I'm not as worried about it as I was before the spring.
Colin Kaepernick, I guess it all comes full circle, doesn't it?
In a way it does. And your Hassan Haskins analysis plays too into what I'm saying, and that this will be a different style of team. They have to take the reins off of this team because its strength is in its explosiveness. Okay? And to not play to that is to actually let some teams that are good but should not beat us on our schedule. A competitive Maryland. A game against Nebraska. That's a great example right there. Okay? Those are teams that should not beat us 22 versus 22. But if we don't play to where the emphasis of talent is on our team, if we try to force the explosiveness into this style, then Nebraska's not going to go into Michigan Stadium and beat us 41-34, right? Could they go in there and beat us 28-24, 31-28? Yeah, you see my point? Okay. So that is where coaching and those sorts of things come into play. And if it's very clear that that's what we need now, is we need to look a little bit more explosive, given that's where the talent is. And I think that will invariably at some point lead to a change at the quarterback spot.
So in your scenario, which is very likely that McNamara is the starter out of the gate, but they're grooming McCarthy and waiting for that situation to play out where it's obvious to everyone that he is needed, does McCarthy still have a similar role out of the gate and for the first 4 or 5 weeks that he
absolutely, yeah.
Maybe the tip-off is that it's even expanded.
Yes. I think it will even be expanded. I think you'll see like whole drives. I think it'll be less situational because he is the guy that adds the extra man in the run game you have to account for that you don't with CADE McNamara. That's what we saw mostly last year, and then they would strategically throw, and just like that dime that he threw against you guys there in the final game. But I think you will absolutely see it expanded. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if after the first 4 weeks McCarthy doesn't start a single game and still has the team lead in touchdown passes, both because of who they're playing and because I think you'll see an expanded role there. Yeah.
And just to go back to an earlier point, I think this Darius Clemens, maybe he's an example of what we're talking about in regards to depth and speed in layers and in waves versus what it's been in the past, because he's a guy that could probably play this fall, but they don't need him to play this fall. And he showed us, and it's not just a one catch in the spring game. I'm hearing that he's showing that in practice day to day, but the program's arrived at a point or getting very close to it where, hey, this guy's amazing. He could play at this level in the Big Ten, but we don't need him now.
Totally agree. So coming out of this, because it'll be a few weeks before we talk again, if you were going to put, or actually if you were going to predict what the Vegas win total for this program will be for this fall, what do you think it'll be? Remember last year it started at 8, I believe. So what do you think the opening win total is for Michigan football this fall?
I'm pretty confident on this one. I'll go 9.5.
I think that's probably accurate. Force you to kind of either go for double digits or not. And I would not be shocked though if it's 10, because the name ID of Michigan and the amount of action you'll take in favor of them. And so you try to maybe game plan that out now in advance with a 10. But if I had to guess, I'd guess 9.5 as well. Good stuff, Mark. As always, man, we'll talk to you again soon, all right?
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
You bet. This week's Twitter poll results. Let's totally switch gears here. Awkward segue alert, and go to basketball. We asked you, who is most likely to be Michigan basketball's center next season? And this question comes down to who you think's going to stay and who's going to go. 37.6% of you say it'll be Hunter Dickinson. That would actually be my vote. I think he will return. Moussa Diabate got the vote of 31.2% of you. I think the chances are higher he would come back if Hunter left. But I don't think it's an automatic he'll leave just because Hunter comes back either. But obviously, if Hunter were to leave, Moussa would then have all that space and all of those minutes. Terrace Reed, the incoming freshman, top 40 recruit on their top 10 recruiting class, he was the answer of 13.8% of you. And then 17.4% of you said a transfer. So I think the fact these answers are so divided is indicative of how open-ended this is. But if there were a betting market right now where I could go and say, hey, who's Michigan starting center next year, I would go down depending on what the odds are, provided the juice isn't too punitive. I'd get down on Hunter Dickinson as Michigan center next year. Our question of the week is actually completely self-serving and not a question. I had a chance to take my son Noah down to our G League team here in Des Moines last week, and we picked the game that Xavier Simpson, one of our favorite Michigan basketball players, was coming into play for the Oklahoma City Blue, and we were down on the court before the game. He gave us a nod when he saw each of us sporting our Michigan gear, and then afterwards he saw my son Noah wearing one of his Christmas gifts, the old school maize and blue Michigan Jordan throwbacks. He got a kick out of those, and so Xavier was kind enough to take a picture with my son Noah. So there you see, and my son and future son-in-law, as I used to call Xavier Simpson, because I freaking love that guy. All right, so I just wanted to show that off because I'm a proud papa, and this is my show, and I get to do stuff like that. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. So this is basically the end. What is this now? Aaron, is this season 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22? Good season Lord. 6. We started this in 2017. Yeah. So this is the conclusion of season 6, the season finale of Michigan Podcast. Now, for us, a hiatus is not going to be 5 or 6 months. It might be 4 or 5 weeks. All right. But sometime in May, we'll be back with some original content when it's time to now start taking more of a look forward. But until then, don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. You can also like, rate, subscribe, share, follow, help us, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, however you watch or listen to this, help us to find more Michigan fans just like you. This was our most successful season yet. In terms of views, and we just can't thank you enough. We just started doing this because we had a nice studio and all kinds of spare time, and I'm a lifelong Michigan fan, so, you know, why not, scratch that itch a little bit, and this thing has just grown beyond what we ever envisioned. So thank all of you very much, and until the next time, never forget, go Blue.